Welcome, Ricardo Baeza-Yates, to the podcast on human-centered AI. We're thrilled to have you here. You're the Director of Research at the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern University. You've done very many things in computing, in AI, and so on, and we'd be happy to hear a brief introduction of yourself.
Thank you, Alan, Matthias, for the invitation. So, I'm a data scientist before data science existed. I guess now 34 years after my PhD. First, I did a lot on algorithms, and then I moved to information retrieval, then to data mining, and then to machine learning, and finally, responsible AI. I have been in academia half of the time, and the other half in industry, especially in Yahoo Labs, and then also was 4 years CTO of a software company, so I was really not too much of research for some time. And I have been back to academia now 4 years.
Okay. I remember I started reading your IR papers years ago when I was a master's student, and I've sort of seen your career over the course of time, and I've seen your works on responsible AI and so on. And it would be interesting to see, what do you think of human-centered AI?
Yeah, I think human-centered AI is very important, especially today where people don't think about the consequences of the use of the technology. But at the same time, I think it's too narrow. I think we should be talking about Earth-centered AI, because we forget the rest of the planet in everything we do, and we need to do special things to remember that. So I hope at some point we always remember that nature is part of us, and we cannot basically don't think about it.
Right. This is quite an interesting perspective, because I think we've seen in one of our earlier episodes, we were talking about humanity-centered AI, but this is even taking it one level higher.
Yeah, and if there are aliens somewhere, maybe we can include the universe. Why not?
Yeah. I guess the interesting aspect would be how to center it on things that are sort of beyond human, beyond Earth. I guess we'll get there.
Let me give you an example. And today we are seeing the problem. For example, the energy consumption of AI, especially generative AI, is huge. And we are affecting already like water tables and electric energy and so on. So we should do something anyways, because otherwise we will be in trouble too.
Yeah. In HCAI, there's this thing called more than human-centered design. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it kind of has the same sort of ethics as to not just look at humans, but look at the bigger picture.
Exactly.
It's interesting because when we look at machine learning conferences, AI conferences, research in general, it's all doing all of this super heavy work. But we also know that even the good old-fashioned AI algorithms perform reasonably well in comparison. They don't use the same amounts of energy, but still the trends are moving away from that. So how can we work to reverse that? How can we sort of go back to using the simpler methods for things where simpler methods are useful?
Yeah, that's a great point, because that's the other thing that I always preach, is that most problems in the world don't have big data. And we have this bias towards big data, a lot of computation, big models. For example, these big language models, only some companies will be able to develop them because of the data, the amount of data you need, the amount of computing resources you need, and the amount of money you need to do that. We are focusing on the needs of very few companies, and we are forgetting that, for example, most, let's say, medical applications that use AI will never have big data. And there we need these techniques that we already know, and they're quite good, maybe not as good as a deep learning network, but reasonably well for what you're trying to do. We have small data. We have quality problems in data. Not always you can basically learn without basically have labeled data, which is the case for a language model. So basically you learn from the text that is not labeled. I would say in real practical application, this is the truth 99% of the time. I don't know what's wrong with us, but we are focusing on the problems that look bigger, but they are not difficult, because sometimes just you put more data and you can solve that. But there have been some important work on the impact on the environment. For example, the famous stochastic parrot paper opened the Pandora box on this problem last year. The usage of water when you use ChatGPT a lot. I don't know why people don't do the same analysis for TikTok or Instagram, because I'm sure they're using more energy. People have estimate that ChatGPT uses 50 times more energy in every interaction than a search engine. And we are wrongly using it as a search engine. So we're using 50 times more energy in a wrong usage, because predicting knowledge is not the same as knowing knowledge. We will not convince this big company that this is the wrong way to go. But so what I try to do is to basically be responsible and then try to at least be aware of all these risks.
Yeah. We know that most problems can be solved by simple models like linear regression and so on, but that's not what startups get funding for. That's not what you publish papers in A-ranked conferences for. So this is a difficult thing.
So
Yeah.
is linear regression AI?
Good point.
Investors it is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, right, or is just statistics? I mean, it's from the 19th century, because
Yeah.
but no, but it's interesting because once in a meeting, like a non-AI person said, and we're doing linear regressions all the time. I said, well, for you, linear regression is AI, and she said yes. So for me, it's interesting, like that you say, like for investors, maybe it's AI, but for me, it's not. Like you need to learn something to be AI.
I've seen pitch decks where people call regular expressions AI. So I think it really depends on who you're trying to convince that your solution is the most advanced. Of course, statistics won't give you the $1 million venture capital, right? I think this sort of ties. I was looking at this ACM technology policy document that you co-authored, which lists a few of these things, like, for instance, AI systems developers should undertake extensive impact assessments prior to the deployment of AI systems. And I think this really fits into that, because, impact assessments aren't just the performance of the system, but also impact on environment and so on. But I kind of don't see that happening neither in research nor in industry. Do you have any insights on how we can get there?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we did that, and I was one of the two main co-authors. We did these new principles for responsible algorithmic systems in October 22. So soon we'll have 2 years, and I have been very hard to push them. There are like 3 new principles. The first one is my contribution to that committee, where I push for this legitimacy and competence principle, which is the one that is tied to impact assessment. So before you do anything, what are the risks? What are the impacts of those risks? That's the legitimacy part, because you need to show that this benefits society much more than harms society. Like we do today with the drugs, with vaccines, with many other things that we make sure that don't harm people. And it's not like half and half, like 50% good, 50% bad. No, it's like 99% good or even more, and 1% bad. And there we can say, okay, maybe this is worth to try, because the benefits really are much more than the harms. And then also you need to have the right competence not only on the technical computing part, but also the expertise of the domain of the application. And very important, because we had already some problems, maybe in Netherlands, in France, where the people didn't have the administrative competence to do it. So basically, they didn't have the permission to do it. Like, they couldn't take the decision if you read the institution or whatever their main mandate was. The second new principle was to basically to reinforce minimizing harm. So like, especially because of all the cases of discrimination of AI, which is the most common case today on models using in banking and education, hiring, and so on. And then we sent these 8 principles to Europe. This is a nice story. And they said, the 8 principles, do you agree? And said, yeah, we agree. But when people read minimizing harm, they will read human-centered AI. They didn't say it that way, but because we're in this podcast of human-centered AI, and because of the first question, basically they said, let's add a principle that reminds ourselves that we need to minimize the environmental impact too. So basically, this is the last principle, and it was sadly is the last one because was added to something was already done. Because it would have been nice to put it together with the second principle that was minimizing harm. So, for example, minimize human and environmental harm. This could be one single principle, and that's why I started with this Earth-centered computing, because this comes from that discussion 2 years ago on yes, we have this cognitive bias to forget about the Earth, our planet. This is the first part of the answer, but I can go on impact assessment, which I really think is the main problem that is not done. This will be something that I will put in a regulation, not for use of AI, for anything. Like today we have environmental impact assessment every time we do a large infrastructure project. That's compulsory in all developed countries and in most countries in the world. So if we have a system that will affect humans and environment, why we can't do the same? This will be my first regulation. That you need to do, if you can impact humans and environment in a certain scale, let's say in a large scale, but through internet you can affect 5 billion people, you need to do that. And this is what is not done today. So the question is actually why it's not done today. There are many reasons. One, there's no economical incentive to do it. Second, many people don't know how to do it. Third, measure risk is not trivial. That's a pity of the EU AI Act that measures risk in 4 categories that 3 of them don't really exist, because we are trying to find 3 categories in something that is measured by a continuous variable like risk. So where you put the limit between low and high risk. It's completely arbitrary, like many other things we have done in society, like dark skin, clear skin. That's also another continuous variable. We invented this category for other purposes. Power, to simplify regulation in this case, and in most cases, only complicates our lives. Now, even if we can measure the risk, it's not too easy to measure the impact. It's also very hard to measure that, because I think it's not the best metaphor, but I think it's a metaphor that also explains the problem. We had problems with certain technology in the past, like chemical weapons, atomic bombs, and we have learned the hard way to not use them. With AI, it's more like a cluster bomb. Through internet, you can get to hundreds of thousands of people that are very hard to characterize, because in some cases, maybe almost like random, not like these are African-American women or whatever, random. And then we only know the problem until we know the impact. And this is what's happening today. Maybe language models have, between quotes, learned a lot of bad shit, in the sense that they will output wrong stuff. But we don't know what are those things. So we don't know even how to ask. So it's like a double black box to me. Not only it's very hard to understand what the black box is doing, but also it's like have another bolt inside that we don't know how to query to answer, to know what are the dangers there. So what is coming out of the Pandora box? We don't know.
Who else is supposed to understand this than AI researchers?
Yeah, but for example, last week I was in the 50th Latin American Research Computer Science Conference. I was invited because I was a former president of all the computer science departments of Latin America. And I gave a keynote there on responsible AI. And also another keynote was by Don Knuth. I'm sure you know Don Knuth. I think one of the best computer scientists that exists. He's 86 years old, so he did an online Q&A session. And of course, people asked him about AI. So what do you think about AI? And something he said was so interesting how he put it. He says something like, I will try to paraphrase, I never thought about using an algorithm that we don't understand. Think about it. Like, it's like saying, I never thought about eating something that I don't know if it would kill me or not. So wow, this is pure wisdom. And he said other things that were very interesting, but this was one that really, for him, the idea of having algorithms that are written by other algorithms, because at the end models are written by algorithms. So this is like a meta algorithm, have these issues that he never thought about.
Because you're talking about, computer science, you talk about Donald Knuth, and also you co-authored the handbook on algorithms and data structures in 91, right? So you kind of know this stuff. And I'm sure in that book, you talk about like one way to assess an algorithm is by doing order notation, look at the complexity, time complexity. So I'm thinking like, is there something next to time complexity that should have been in that book to assess whether it's not obviously probably a global and humanic impact or risk assessment, but is there some sort of measure that you could put that would be similar to order notation?
Yeah, great question. I haven't talked about that book in many years. It was my first book, and I was just because my PhD advisor needed help to finish the second edition, but I helped. I think today I would add, not only at that time we were worried about memory and time and memory, but I think energy is something that we should add, and this ties with the environment. So what is the usage of energy? But now that you ask that, I remember other things that I usually mention in some of my talks, is that, for example, we are even forgetting about the time dimension. You see typical papers where you have 2 or 3 models, and then you have typically the vertical axis is some measure of quality, accuracy, whatever. And then the horizontal axis is some measure of, for example, data size. How much data can you process? And then you have variance curves, and then, okay, the one that is in the top, that is the best one. And you see this in thousands of papers. But these graphs don't take into account how much time you took or how much energy you took to reach the position in this graph. And probably the ones that are on lower use much less resources, much less time than the one on the top. And you are seeing this in generative AI these days. But people seem to not care. And if you think I'm old enough that the first computer I used had 64 kilobytes. Can you imagine something working in 64 kilobytes today? I think you need at least 64 gigabytes to have a reasonable cell phone, or maybe a computer will use only like mine has only 32. Sometimes I'm using 32 gigabytes in my Mac. So we love this obsession to do things better, to do things faster, to do this we're using less resources, and only cell phones and maybe sensors and maybe other small devices need to worry about that because of mainly energy, battery, not necessarily power or things. So I wish Don Knuth had more influence, because I'm sure he would remember us all these things. I mean, like, you need to be worried about doing things responsible, in the sense that the solution is not to buy a bigger computer. The solution is to design a better algorithm. And I believe that's the right way, because it's part of the ethics of our profession. Do the best with the less possible resources.
That's an interesting perspective, because if you look back at the, say, 15, 20 years of research in AI, it's all been deep learning, and it's not been making algorithms more efficient. Mainly it's been throwing more compute at it, better GPUs, more GPUs, a bigger infrastructure. But it's only just recently that we start seeing this type of reasoning around, well, the energy use. I think there was a keynote at HCAI this year. I think Kate Crawford was talking about water usage with ChatGPT. And I think ECIR, the European Conference on Information Retrieval, in their opening this year, they had a slide where they listed estimates of energy use for papers. This is 2024. This is the first time we really see this type, or at least I saw this type of thing. So I guess you could maybe claim it's showing the field maturing maybe, or it's maybe just showing us waking up.
Can I say both? That might be
Sure.
No, but think about that. For example, the first paper that talked about bias in computing systems, the landmark paper in the mid of the 90s, the topic was not discussed seriously until 20 years later. And I think the same is happening here. There have been papers that talk about responsible use of energy. And now when we're using like a significant fraction of our electrical energy on this, like when it's too late, because already we're reading in one single digit, and the estimations for 2030 are in 2 digits. Really? Like, I don't know how much, but are we using 5% of the energy that we produce on procrastination? But I don't know why we always think about this thing when we're already in trouble, not in advance. That's why it's so important to have this impact assessment, because let's think about it before, not after. So let's think about it now, and then we avoid an audit in 3 years that also will affect our reputation and also will be a lot of money on compensation, for example, to people. So, but people decide, no, this will not happen. Let's take the risk. And 3 years later, they find the problem. And we have been involved in audit, for example, for health insurance companies that had the problem already, and now they don't want to repeat it. But they are having the audit because they had the problem, not because they were thinking, let's be wise and think about this now. If you want to continue in this line, I think the main problem today also in AI and let's say human-centered AI is evaluation. I mean, we are evaluating everything wrong. And I just gave a keynote at Sigma where I started to put everything like store, and I'm writing an article about the limitations of data, machine learning, and us, because the main problems come from us. But one of the main problems in machine learning is how we evaluate these models.
Yeah, we've been talking about in IR and Rexis and machine learning about how evaluation is broken for as long as I've been involved in the community, but never have we spoken about things like energy use.
But I'm talking about accuracy now. I'm not talking about energy. Even if we're not evaluating energy, that's the problem.
Yeah.
We're using accuracy. That's the main problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, because accuracy is measuring success. And harm measures the opposite, failure. I don't care. And the example I use is that if you have an elevator that says it works 99% of the time, most, let's say, common sense people will not use the elevator, right? Because it may fail and you don't know what will happen. But if the elevator says doesn't work 1% of the time, when doesn't work stops, you will use it because you know you're safe. This is the difference between knowing the side effects of the drug or not. But today, we don't know the side effects. People say, oh, this works 90% of the time, but what about the other 10%? What will happen? We don't really know. And this is worrisome when you have autonomous car killing people, or when you have models discriminating people, or you have, for example, models favoring people too. So they have the two sides of the problem. That's why I'm working with some of my PhD students in measuring harm, try to find what are the key errors that the system can do. And I call these non-human errors. These are errors that AI does that the human being will never do. For example, even if you are, let's say, drunk, you will recognize a woman in a bicycle at night because you are trained to recognize that. Or you will recognize a dog from a cat. But AI systems sometimes make this mistake. They don't recognize people at night, or they confuse a dog with a cat. And those two things, maybe you are in danger. And also, because these are errors that you will never make, these are really complicated because people are not expecting them. It's like, I can never see that, right? And then suddenly you see problems. And I think this class of problems, at least, are the ones that are more complicated for humans because they are outside humanity. No, here is only humanity, not theirs, but they're outside our comfort zone. And suddenly we see some stupid mistakes. Sometimes are, let's say, funny, but other times are not funny at all.
So you're talking about problems that humans wouldn't make and that we don't anticipate the machines to make. I'm wondering if, but I think you're also talking about that in your center about a human in the loop, that experiential AI is human in the loop, right? Is that not solving that problem? Like when you have a human basically able to react to whatever the machine is trying to do?
Yeah, I would like to ban human in the loop.
Yeah.
Because this was a way to say, okay, let's have someone overseeing the system. But the reality is that we shouldn't be in the loop. We should be in charge. We should be in control. And that's the right way to do it. Like humans in charge. So humans in the loop is a patch. It's like, we have the problem, let's put someone looking after. No. Humans in charge means that it's a responsible design by design. So you have that condition from the beginning in the system that you are in charge. And then if you're in charge, nothing wrong will happen because humans are in charge. But basically today, people are doing things like AI is in charge. And then to make sure that there's no mistake, you put a human in the loop. It's not the right solution, right? I mean, think about it. It's the wrong way to do it, but it's the easiest, cheapest way to do it. And that's why we are doing that. Like guardrails in language models. Guardrails catch all the obvious things until someone else put a prompt that is smarter than the guardrail, and you get how to do an atomic bomb. And also there you have a huge evaluation problem because the number of possible prompts, if you don't put a limit to the prompt, even if you put a limit to the prompt, it's exponential. It's huge. How large has to be the test set to basically evaluate that? 10,000 prompts, 100,000 prompts, 1 million prompts. Doesn't matter how much you put. The metaphor I use there is that you go to, let's say, to the Baltic Sea, closer to you, take a water sample, you analyze it, and you say, oh, there's no bacteria in the Baltic Sea. We're safe. You just took one cup from the Baltic Sea, but the Baltic Sea is huge. And we're doing the same today with language models. So in evaluation, we're fooling ourselves so badly.
But I guess theoretically, you could think that you need to have a bigger model overseeing the smaller model. And it's the smaller model that you then put into a product that you release. But then at least you have a bigger product model that is overseeing the smaller one. And that's always right.
Yeah, the other day someone said, no, we need to have a small model overseeing the large model. I say, well, this is nonsense. Of course, this will not work because it has less parameters than the large model. So we'll never be able to predict anything that will go wrong.
This makes me think of the papers on reinforcement learning with AI feedback, where we've removed the human in the loop, but we've replaced it with more or less the same models. So that doesn't really fix evaluation. It doesn't really solve the problem. It tries to look at it from a different perspective, but I'm not sure if it actually is the right way to go.
Well, this is like, let's see, that's a good paper. Well, in the sense that what they were trying to do, I don't think it's too sensible. But it will be like, I guess the best metaphor will be here that the typical example of searching your keys under the light. Yeah, so, okay, we can fix everything we know, but really we cannot fix everything we don't know. And this has happened because these models will fix themselves on things that they know that they shouldn't do, although using no is dangerous because we are humanizing them. But clearly we go back to what I said before. I mean, we don't know how to query them in a way that we can find out all the wrong things that they could output, because that may be very large. And second, it's not trivial to come up with just the right prompt to find out. And I think the best example is last year when someone said, put a prompt that repeated three times the same word. I don't remember which was the word, but it was a short word. And after repeating like 3-4 times the same word, which doesn't make any sense in any language, the output was a private record of the person.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a data privacy breach by just a silly prompt. So if that works, imagine how many other things will do something similar. It's unbounded. And we seem not to care. We say, no, we can mitigate it, we can control it. But this is like controlling, I guess, I don't know, a power plant that doesn't really have like a dam, but more like have a neck. And water is going out everywhere. So yeah, you fix one, but you need to fix many more. I don't want to sound negative. I think if we don't make people aware of all these problems, they keep being too positive.
Yeah.
So I have a negative bias on purpose. There are too many people with positive bias.
So to try and frame it positively, the awareness is rising. We have things like human-centered AI becoming a thing. We have this entire fact movement looking at fairness, accountability, transparency, and so on, trying to figure out what AI systems do. But it's also difficult to figure out how to create a catch-all system or infrastructure for these things. Somehow we need to test how we can use these systems and how we can develop these systems, but the difficulty lies in making sure that they don't go out of bounds, and it's not a simple problem.
Well, but I think the first part, the first thing is not about testing. The first thing is about how to start the design. So typically, today we have some assumptions, and we quickly do a proof of concept to see if they work. And if they work 80% of the time, we're happy. But the whole thing was the wrong assumption, because we should be happy if they're 100%. But for example, we didn't talk about, and there's a lot of pseudoscience here. For example, there's no scientific paper that have proven that data from other people can predict a new person. On average, that may work, but I'm sure that in many cases it doesn't work. And you don't know in which cases will not work. So if you don't start your design talking to, for example, the users, making sure your assumptions are correct, I'm sure that in most cases you are forgetting things, you are not taking some important things in account. Even if there is a perception of discrimination, you need to address that. Maybe you just need to change something on the user experience. But today we are not doing that. We are not basically having all the stakeholders from the beginning involving the design of a key system for society. If you had done that, I think we will remove 99% of the problems we have today. So that's common sense. Like, if you include everyone that can be affected from the beginning, the probability of having a problem will be 100 times lower.
And is this like a matter of training the people who do these things? So, because I mean, as a computer scientist, training was on algorithms and machine learning and so on. It wasn't really on thinking of how a user will think of my algorithm, right? But in essence, it should have been, right? So, is it a matter of training, or rethinking how we train the people that work with AI and machine learning and so on?
Yeah, I think part of the solution is training, for example, on ethics from the beginning, and then you do it the first year of studies, and then in every new subject, you do one example where ethics is involved, and you get training in ethics, because ethics is contextual. So you need to see many problems to understand the trade-offs between, for example, harm, autonomy, or justice. But it's more than that. It's to realize that we are not building computer science systems. We're building systems that are beyond computer science, that are social systems. So for that, we need a multidisciplinarity. It's like you need to have the sociologists, you need to have the ethicists, you need to have the psychologists. Maybe you need to have an ethnographer in some cases. Also, you need to have people that is very good at design. And yes, we need to also have the computer scientists and engineers to do the technical part. But it's not something we can solve alone. And I think that's part of our arrogance, that we think that we can solve all these things alone, which is not true. These are systems that are much more complex than anything that can be trained. So it doesn't make sense to train a person in all these things that I mentioned. It's too complicated. Also, you need a different philosophy in each case. You will need to study 20 years to be, I don't know, a computer scientist, sociologist, psychologist, and so on. Some people have done it by choice, like having more than one PhD. But the truth is that we need to say, okay, this is not a computer science problem. This is a multidisciplinary problem, and approach it that way.
It's quite obvious it's not enough to have a computer scientist. If we are talking about technology that even Don Knuth says he doesn't understand. So if he doesn't understand, no other computer scientists can understand it. And so we need more.
Now, I think, and I personally will claim that it's not that we don't understand it, because they will say, no, and we understand exactly how a neural network works, and that's correct, that's true. I think what we don't understand is the output of them, because they have so many parameters that we cannot really even have a math tool to, and you can try to predict that. In all cases we do that. It's like a small model trying to understand a big model. And this is like saying, okay, yeah, so we can have a small model understanding you, for example, a person, but of course the understanding will be much less complex than what we are, for example. And in this analogy, maybe we can think that we are the most, for people that think we're like machine learning. I don't believe that, but some people think that we are same kind of intelligence, although I don't believe that. But we can think that today we are the top model, like the one that is in the top, and then we're building the large language models, and then we have other models that are much smaller. So in that sense, we are the model that have to control everything, because we have larger number of parameters. So we are the human in the loop at the end, but we need to be in charge.
I'm thinking, because I've been thinking a lot about what you said, that Don said, and I'm thinking about it as, I mean, we obviously know how to sort a list, right? And we understand the output of that sorted list, but it's as if we didn't understand the implication of having a list sorted. We wouldn't understand that it means that we can now find things more easily, or that the order has extra significance. But here in this case of, for instance, LLMs, we know that it's going to predict the next word. And we know that if we run it several times, it's going to give us some sort of output, but we don't really understand what those answers are going to be, or what the actual recursive behavior of that would be.
I think the same happens in information retrieval. So I think information retrieval in that sense is the precursor of AI, because we build ranking algorithms for billions of documents. We get a ranked list, but you can't really tell why the order is like that. Why this document is better than this one? Well, the algorithm decided that, but sorry, I can't tell you. And some human might say, oh, it's wrong. I think this is better. And maybe the human is right. But going only to the algorithm, we cannot explain why, for example, BM25 put this, because it's too complicated. You need to, this is where machine learning is so good. Understanding huge amount of that, not understanding, sorry, processing a lot of data and coming up with something that makes sense, but we don't understand why.
I think it's an interesting analogy, especially thinking of IR, because now there's so much talk about human centricity in AI, but IR is really the most user-centric or human-centric system there is, right? But I can't really recall reading anything about human-centered information retrieval, to be perfectly honest.
But I think that's because everything in information retrieval is around relevance, and relevance is human. So I think if it's encoded in the measure that we are trying to model relevance. well, not the measure, but the concept we're trying to measure, relevance. And this is human. This is the first thing I teach in my classes of information retrieval, that relevance is also so human that there's no single answer. So for you, the order will be different than from other people, because you know more, because you have a different need, because you analyze things in a different way. So there's so many factors that can change. So relevancy in some senses. And it's interesting because IR is, I guess it's the only, before AI, it's the only computer science field that you need to live with this uncertainty. And you have to embrace it and accept it to be able to do research, for example. We don't know how to really measure relevance, but we don't care. Let's do it. Today we're in something very similar with machine learning, but the consequences are much worse because there's no harm in having a wrong ranking, most of the time. But if you apply the same idea to every problem in the world, the dangers are much, much larger. And I never thought about this metaphor with ranking. I just got it from our conversation. So thank you for inspiring me.
I think we're getting close to the end here, and it seems like we're perhaps able to end on a pretty good note, because what this podcast really is about is trying to figure out what HCAI is, right? And talking to different people. What is HCAI? And perhaps what you've said now in the end is basically HCAI is just AI that is relevant for people. Is it perhaps that simple? Is that it? It's just AI that is relevant to people.
I think this could be a way to put it, but I think maybe relevant can be interpreted in so many ways.
Yes.
I would say that, and it's something I always say, is we need to think about AI as another kind of intelligence, computational intelligence, that help us to be better. So it's a complement to us. So I would say, for me, if we talk about human-centered AI and not Earth-centered AI, human-centered AI should be the way to empower people. And this is, I think, a better word for me. I like how we empower people so they can be more, better well-being, more productive, if that's the need, and more happy. Surely that's the need. Because if we do this well, AI in the future can do everything that we don't want to do. And I love this tweet from a Polish woman, I don't remember her name, saying, I don't want AI to write for me and then I have time to do my laundry. No, I want AI to do my laundry so I have more time to write. This is what we want. So imagine a world where AI does everything that we don't want to do. This is not the case today because most people in the world are not lucky like us, and they're doing things that they don't like to do, and they're surviving in some sense. But if we have achieved that, imagine that world. That world is the real renaissance. You can develop the potential, the things you want to do. This is my utopia. We're not going that way today, but I think we can go that way if we change the incentives, the market incentives, the social incentives, and we improve the training of people on ethics and well-being, and maybe philosophies like Ubuntu or other things that worry about more about the group than the individual.
I cannot think of any better way to end this episode. Those were very wise words. I was a little bit worried we were going to have to rename the podcast Relevant AI. So I'm glad we don't have to do that. So Ricardo, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to the podcast. It was very interesting.